The wind tore across the desert plains of the Arizona territory like a restless spirit the night he found her, and if fate had blinked even once, she would have died alone beneath that bleeding sunset. His name was Daniel Mercer, a quiet rancher who had carved survival out of dust and loneliness just north of the rugged lands once fiercely guarded by the warriors of the Apache. And though years had hardened his hands and weathered his face, nothing in his life had prepared him for the moment his horse shied at the edge of a dry arroyo, and he saw her lying there barely breathing, blood dark against the sand. An arrow snapped near her shoulder, and the faintest whisper of life trembling in her chest. She was not dressed like a settler woman, not adorned like townfolk, but wore the earth-toned leathers and beaded markings of her people. And even unconscious, there was something unbroken about her spirit, something fierce beneath the stillness. And though Daniel knew the dangers of crossing tribal lines, knew the whispers in town about raids and retaliation, knew that rescuing her could brand him an enemy to both sides, he slid from his saddle without hesitation, because some choices are not made by fear but by instinct. He carried her carefully, as though the desert itself might shatter if he moved too quickly, and rode hard toward his isolated ranch beneath a sky turning purple with coming night, unaware that this single act of mercy would bind his life to hers in ways neither blood nor law could undo. Her name, he would later learn, was Apache, which meant butterfly, though nothing about her felt fragile, and for 3 days she drifted between fever and silence while Daniel worked with steady patience, cleaning the wound, crushing herbs he'd learned from an old traveling healer, whispering reassurances she could not yet hear. And somewhere in those quiet hours he realized he was no longer tending a stranger but guarding something sacred. When her eyes finally opened, dark and sharp as obsidian beneath moonlight, there was no fear in them, only awareness, calculation, and a flicker of recognition that he was not her enemy. Yet trust did not come easily, and she tried to rise despite her weakness, demanding in her language to know where she was, who he was, and why she still breathed. Daniel spoke gently, explaining he found her abandoned and bleeding, that he meant no harm, and though words were thin bridges between cultures carved by centuries of mistrust, something in his steady voice calmed her enough to remain. Days passed, and healing is a strange intimacy, for in silence, two souls begin to see one another more clearly than words ever allow. And Daniel learned she had been separated from her band after an ambush by outlaws who sought to stir conflict for profit, and that her sister's 3 fierce guardians, bound not only by blood but by oath, would already be searching for her, believing her dead or worse. He knew then that once she was strong enough to ride, he must return her to her people. Yet each sunrise made that thought heavier in his chest, because somewhere between boiling water and binding wounds, between quiet glances across a lantern-lit room, he had begun to feel something dangerous, something that did not belong to a man who had sworn never to love again after burying his wife years before. Apache saw it too, the loneliness behind his restraint, the kindness he tried to hide beneath gruff simplicity, and though she owed him her life, she refused to owe him her heart. Not yet, not without certainty. But destiny does not wait for certainty, and on the 7th morning, hoofbeats thundered across the ridge like approaching storm clouds, and Daniel stepped outside to find 3 mounted Apache women silhouetted against the rising sun, their posture regal, their gazes sharp with warning. Sisters unmistakably, one bearing a rifle across her back, one holding a spear steady, and the third with braids threaded in red cloth that marked her as eldest. They dismounted without greeting, eyes scanning Daniel as though measuring his worth in silence. And when Apache emerged from the cabin doorway, pale but standing, a cry escaped them, not of weakness, but of fierce relief. Yet relief quickly turned to scrutiny as the eldest sister, Niali, stepped forward and demanded to know why a white rancher held their sister beneath his roof. And Daniel answered plainly, without embellishment, that he found her dying and chose to save her, Nothing more, nothing less. The silence that followed felt like judgment carved in stone, and though Apache spoke in his defense, explaining his care and honor, the sisters' eyes did not soften, because among their people, a life saved is not a debt, it's the beginning of a test. And as the wind lifted dust between them, Nayeli declared in firm, unyielding voice that if Daniel believed himself worthy of even standing near their sister again, he would have to prove it, not through words, not through charity, but through courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. Daniel could have refused, could have stepped back into the safety of his own world and watched them ride away. But instead he met their gaze without flinching, because somewhere between the desert wind and the quiet strength in Apache's eyes, he understood this was no longer about obligation, it was about love. And love, if it is real, must be earned in fire. And so as the sisters mounted once more and beckoned him to follow toward lands few settlers dared tread, Daniel saddled his horse knowing he was riding not only into Apache territory, but into a trial that would either break him or forge him into something far greater than he had ever been. And if you believe that love should be tested by courage and not convenience, then stay with this story, because what comes next will challenge everything he thought he knew about worthiness, honor, and the price of a woman's heart. The journey into Apache territory stripped Daniel of every illusion he had ever carried about strength. For courage in the open desert is easy compared to courage beneath watchful eyes that do not trust you. And from the moment he crossed into lands once fiercely defended by the Apache, he felt the weight of history pressing against his back like the barrel of a gun. The sisters rode ahead without speaking, testing not only his endurance but his resolve, leading him through narrow canyon passes and across sun-scorched ridges where water was scarce and shadows held memory, until they reached a hidden settlement, nestled between cliffs like a secret the earth refused to surrender. There the true trial began, not in battle, but in patience, humility, and the willingness to stand alone without anger. The elders gathered, faces unreadable, and though some murmured in resentment that a settler dared walk among them, her pony stood tall beside him, not pleading but observing, because she would not choose a man who needed saving, she would choose one who could stand on his own spirit. Nayeli spoke before the council, recounting how Daniel found their sister, how he tended her wound, but she did not offer praise, for praise given too soon weakens judgment. Instead she announced the trials. First, he must ride into the northern ravines where the same outlaws who attacked Apache had been sighted, not to seek revenge, but to bring proof they would no longer threaten Apache lands. Second, he must endure a night alone atop Spirit Ridge, a place feared even among warriors for the visions it demands from those who climb it. And third, he must choose if danger rose again between settlers and tribe. Where would his loyalty stand? Daniel listened without protest, because love that negotiates is not love that lasts. The first trial nearly cost him his life, for the outlaws were ruthless men who thrived on chaos. And though Daniel was no stranger to firearms, he fought not as a conqueror but as a protector, outmaneuvering them in narrow canyon corridors and disarming their leader after a brutal struggle that left him bloodied yet unbroken. And instead of executing the defeated men, he bound them and delivered them to territorial law, sending a message that justice did not require cruelty. When he returned with proof the threat was ended, murmurs shifted, not approval yet, but respect. The second trial tested not his body but his soul, for atop Spirit Ridge beneath a sky ablaze with stars, he confronted memories long buried, his late wife's death, his fear of loving again, his guilt over surviving when others had not, and alone. In that cold darkness he made peace with the truth that love is not betrayal of the past but continuation of the heart's courage. By dawn he descended changed, not louder, not prouder, but steadier. The final trial came sooner than expected when a misunderstanding between a settler patrol and Apache scouts ignited tension. Near the borderlands, rifles raised, tempers flaring like wildfire, and Daniel found himself standing between two worlds, one that shared his blood and one that now held his future. And in that charged moment he chose not sides but peace, lowering his weapon, stepping forward unarmed, speaking fiercely to the settlers to stand down, declaring that fear would not rule this land again. It was a dangerous gamble, for either side could have fired, but courage disarms faster than bullets when it is undeniable. And slowly, reluctantly, weapons lowered. When silence returned, it was heavier than any applause. Back in the settlement, the elders conferred long into the night, and at last Nieli approached Daniel where he stood outside the firelight, her expression no longer sharp but measured, and she said what few outsiders ever heard. "You have proven not that you're stronger than us, but that you are strong enough for her." Apache stepped forward then, no longer patient observer, but woman choosing her own destiny, and placed her hand in his, not as repayment, not as obligation, but as equal. The sisters nod, not surrender, but acceptance. And in that moment Daniel understood that worthiness is not proven through dominance, but through devotion. He did not conquer their trials, he endured them, and in doing so became part of something greater than himself. Their union was not a fairy tale, stitched in ease, but a bond, forged in trust, tested by fire. And though the desert winds would always carry whispers of the past, they would now carry their story to a story of a man who saved a woman's life and then proved he was worthy of her love, not by claiming her, but by honoring her world. And if this story stirred something in you, if you believe love should demand courage, loyalty, and sacrifice, then subscribe and walk with us into the next tale of wild West hearts and untamed destinies. Because the greatest legends are not born in comfort, they are forged where two worlds dare to meet and choose each other anyway.